In this video, we examine the individuals who were executed during the month of February, taking a closer look at the crimes that led them to death row, the final meals they requested, and the last words they spoke before facing execution. Each case tells a disturbing story of violence, justice, and consequence. The first case takes us to South Carolina, involving Marion Bowman, who was just 20 years old at the time of his crime. On February 16, 2001, Bowman became involved in a heated argument with 21-year-old Candy Louise Martin over money she allegedly owed him. What began as a dispute quickly escalated into a deadly confrontation in a wooded area. During the argument, Bowman shot Martin multiple times. After she was already dead, he dragged her body to a vehicle, placed her in the trunk, and drove to a remote location where he set the car on fire in an attempt to destroy evidence. Earlier that same day, Bowman had reportedly threatened Martin, telling her she would be dead before nightfall. A key witness in the case was Bowman's cousin, James Taiwan Gadsden, who testified that Bowman had planned the killing and that he personally witnessed the crime. Although the defense later argued that the evidence was circumstantial, investigators recovered the murder weapon from a river where it was connected to Bowman through ballistic analysis and DNA testing. In 2002, Bowman was convicted and sentenced to death. For years, he continued to claim his innocence, insisting that crucial evidence had been withheld and that racial bias had affected the fairness of his trial. Despite multiple appeals, his sentence remained in place. The day before his execution, Bowman was offered a final meal. He requested a large spread that included fried seafood, chicken wings, chicken strips, onion rings, banana pudding, German chocolate cake, and cranberry pineapple juice. On January 31, 2025, Bowman was executed by lethal injection. As the curtain to the execution chamber opened, he briefly glanced toward his attorney, then looked up at the ceiling and closed his eyes. When asked for his final statement, Bowman acknowledged the pain caused by his actions. He said that while death row inmates are often seen as monsters, many of them change over time. He expressed sympathy for Candy Martin's family, stating that if his execution brought them any sense of relief, then perhaps it served a purpose. He ended by saying he hoped they could one day find peace. The second case occurred in Texas and involved Stephen Lee Nelson, who was executed for a brutal church robbery turned murder. On March 3, 2011, Nelson, then 24 years old and already on parole for a prior assault, entered North Point Baptist Church in Arlington, with the intent to steal money. Only two people were inside the church at the time, Reverend Clint Dobson, 28, and Judy Elliott, a 69-year-old secretary. Nelson violently attacked both. Dobson was beaten and strangled with a computer cable before Nelson suffocated him with a plastic bag. Elliott was severely beaten, suffering facial fractures and a brain hemorrhage, but she survived after an extensive recovery. After the attack, Nelson stole Dobson's laptop, Elliott's credit cards, and her vehicle. He used the stolen cards to purchase clothing and jewelry and later sold the laptop. Investigators quickly identified him using fingerprints and blood evidence found on his shoes. Although another suspect was briefly detained, charges against that individual were dropped once Nelson's involvement was confirmed. Nelson was convicted of capital murder, a crime punishable by death in Texas. On February 5, 2025, he was executed by lethal injection at the Huntsville State Penitentiary. Because Texas does not allow special last meals, Nelson was not granted one. Just before the injection began, Nelson repeatedly told his wife, Helen Noah Dubois, that he loved her. Dubois watched from the witness room and was permitted to bring her white service dog. Nelson's final statements were brief but emotional. He told his wife he was grateful, said he was at peace, and encouraged others to enjoy life. His final word was love. He was pronounced dead at 6:50 p.m. Central Time. The next case involves Demetrius Terren Frazier, whose crimes spanned multiple states in years. On November 27, 1991, Frazier broke into the Birmingham, Alabama apartment of 40-year-old Pauline Starks Brown. Armed with a gun, he woke her and demanded money. He then sexually assaulted her at gunpoint. Despite Brown pleading for her life, Frazier shot and killed her before stealing cash from the apartment. Months later, on March 8, 1992, Frazier committed another violent crime in Detroit, Michigan. He abducted 14-year-old Crystal Kendrick, holding her captive inside an abandoned house. When she attempted to escape, Frazier shot her, killing her instantly. Frazier was arrested shortly afterward in Michigan, where he confessed to both murders. In 1996, he was convicted in Alabama for the murder of Pauline Brown and sentenced to death. Years later, Alabama introduced nitrogen hypoxia as an execution method, and Frazier chose this option over lethal injection. The day before his execution, Frazier requested a last meal consisting of Taco Bell items, including burritos and a Mountain Dew. On the night of his execution, he became the fourth inmate in Alabama to be put to death using nitrogen hypoxia. He was pronounced dead at 6:36 p.m. Central Time. In his final statement, Frazier apologized to Pauline Brown's friends and family, acknowledging that what he had done should never have happened.
The fourth case comes from Florida and involves James Dennis Ford, whose crimes shocked the state due to their brutality. In 1997, Ford invited Greg and Kimberly Mallory on what was supposed to be a fishing trip. Instead, he attacked them in a remote area. Greg was shot in the head with a .22 caliber rifle and then struck with an axe. Kimberly was beaten, sexually assaulted, and murdered. Even more disturbing, the couple's 22-month-old daughter was left alive in a truck for more than 18 hours, exposed to the elements and covered in her mother's blood. Ford was convicted of murder, sexual assault, and child abuse. The cruelty of the crimes and the vulnerability of the child were significant factors during sentencing. His death sentence was upheld in 1999, and he remained on death row at Florida State Prison for decades. In recent years, Florida's use of the death penalty has fluctuated. While only one execution took place in 2021, 6 were carried out in 2023. Governor Ron DeSantis eventually signed Ford's execution warrant, ending a period of reduced executions in the state. Ford's final meal included steak, macaroni and cheese, fried okra, sweet potato, pumpkin pie, and sweet tea. When asked for his last words, Ford remained silent. However, prison officials later reported that he wrote a note reading, "Hugs, prayers, love. God bless you all." The final case takes us back to Texas, involving Richard Lee Tabler. In November 2004, Tabler murdered Muhammad Ranami, a nightclub manager, and his friend Zed in Killeen, Texas. Tabler and his accomplice, Timothy Don Payne, lured Ranami by pretending to sell sound equipment. Once the victims arrived, they were ambushed. Zed was shot first, followed by Ranami, who was shot again as he was dragged from the vehicle. Payne recorded the crime on video, while Tabler stole Ranami's wallet and personal belongings. Shockingly, Tabler later contacted police to confess and threaten additional killings. 2 days later, he murdered Amanda Benefield and Tiffany Lorraine, 2 teenage nightclub employees he believed had implicated him. Tabler continued calling police, mocking authorities, and issuing new threats. He was eventually arrested, convicted, and sentenced to death for 4 murders. On February 13, 2025, at the age of 46, Tabler was executed by lethal injection, becoming the second person executed in Texas that year. In his final statement, Tabler apologized to the victims' families, many of whom witnessed the execution. He expressed regret for his actions and asked for forgiveness, acknowledging that no apology could undo the harm he caused.
By the final days of February, execution chambers across the United States once again became active. Each case was different, but the ending was the same: a life permanently brought to a close. In this final part, we move beyond headlines and court documents to focus on what is often overlooked: the last moments, the final emotions, and the questions that remain long after the chamber doors are sealed. An execution is not just a procedure, It is the final point of a process that can take decades, years of trials, appeals, and isolation. In the execution chamber, time seems to slow down. The room grows quiet, the witnesses wait, and the person strapped to the gurney faces a moment that cannot be delayed or undone. In recent executions, many inmates use their final words to apologize. Some acknowledged the pain they caused. Others spoke only to their families, and some chose silence, saying nothing at all. According to experts, the final hours before execution are often the most emotionally intense. Some inmates finally accept responsibility, while others maintain their innocence until the very end. Last meals, when allowed, often reveal something deeply human. Many request simple comfort foods, burgers, fried chicken, soda, or dessert, as if trying to experience one last ordinary moment. In states like Texas, where last meals are no longer permitted, executions feel more clinical, stripped of any personal ritual or closure. Inside the witness room, the experience is different for everyone. For victims' families, the execution may represent justice, but it rarely brings peace. Many have spoken afterward about the emptiness that remains, realizing that even the harshest punishment cannot restore what was taken from them. Then there is the question that continues to divide the nation. Does the death penalty truly deliver closure? Supporters argue that it is the ultimate form of justice reserved for the most horrific crimes, and that it sends a clear message about accountability. Critics argue that no government should have the power to take a life, especially within a system that has made irreversible mistakes in the past. The executions carried out in February were not just stories of individual crimes, they were reflections of a system, one that keeps people on death row for decades, only to end everything in a matter of minutes. Once the execution is over, the chamber is cleaned, the lights are turned off, and another case is officially closed. But the questions do not disappear. Each execution adds weight to an ongoing debate about justice, punishment, and morality. Was justice served, or was another life simply taken in the name of the law? That is the question left behind, long after the final heartbeat, long after the witnesses leave the room, and long after February comes to an end.